Us. Are traditional martial arts styles useless? What I mean by our traditional martial arts styles useless, is it useless in combat, street fighting, combat sports, for self-defense, right? Remember, when you're talking about a style, right? A style is something that is created by somebody, right? It's an art form, right? Martial arts style, right? Remember, it's not the style that makes the person. It's the person that makes the style. So what I mean by martial arts styles, I mean like Kung Fu, Karate, Taekwondo, Hapkido, Kempo, Judo, Aikido, Ninjutsu, just to name a few traditional styles. So are all these styles just useless, right? Never work in a real situation, never work in combat sports. In order to make any style effective, a style is something that's created by man. In order to make that style effective, all depends on the person that's implementing the techniques, right? Everything is on movement, motion, right? You have two legs, two hands, right? You can punch, you can kick, elbow, knee. It all depends on the execution of those techniques, and it all depends on the person that's executing the technique, right? Just a style by itself doesn't mean anything until the person takes the style and makes it into something, right? So if you have, say, a karate man challenging a kung fu man, it all depends on the person, right? If you don't put the work into your training, dedicate yourself for years, and practice in a way where it's effective in a real life situation, then it's not going to work. That's common sense. It's not the style, it's the person. I've been studying martial arts for 33 years now, and I've done numerous of different styles, right? I'm not just stuck to one thing. I incorporate different techniques into my martial arts, and I'm from a traditional background. And I can tell you, to have a traditional background is very important. I always say, if you want to learn martial arts, always start out with a traditional style. Learning a traditional style will teach you the foundation, the basics that you need in the martial arts. That could be from the form, balance, coordination, the discipline, and proper technique. Now, this all depends on who you're training with and who's your teacher, right? And it all depends on how much training you put into that style, right? That art form, right? Then you could take your traditional and you can move into any other martial arts. It could be boxing, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, whatever else you want to do. You're going to find it easier to adapt to those other techniques, right? Because you're coming from a traditional background, which gives you that discipline to can take on any other martial arts style, right? As I said, I started with traditional and I'm still traditional, but I incorporate every other thing from boxing, Muay Thai, Taekwondo, Jeet Kune Do, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I incorporate everything else and I pick up those techniques quickly because I came from a traditional background which taught me balance, coordination, form. It teach me how to execute my techniques with precision in striking. So when I moved on to the other styles, it's easy for me to pick up other techniques because I already have a good, strong foundation from the traditional background, right? So without traditional, you won't have anything like MMA, which all MMA is just a combination of different traditional martial art styles compiled into one, right? So if you're doing karate, boxing, kickboxing, kung fu, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that's MMA, mixed martial arts. That's all it really is. But what they're doing, they're branding MMA as a style by itself, right? But it's just really a combination of different techniques all in one, different styles in one. That's all it is, right? And if you want to say, if karate is any good, Kung Fu is any good. If you want to go to combat sports, because combat sports is a good simulation of an actual street fight, you could say. It's not 100%, because as I said, in street fights, there are weapons, extension of the hands, like guns, knives, or whatever weapons you can find on the street. So it's not 100%, but it's still a simulation of what an actual real street fight would probably play out and look like. So karate and kung fu, you have people in UFC, Stephen Thompson, who is using Kempo karate. Even though he has boxing and he has kickboxing, but he has traditional Kempo, which he uses in his fights. And you can tell from his movements, that in and out movement, his footwork, it's hard to adapt to that kind of movement because nobody takes the time to train traditionally anymore. And he's coming from a traditional background, studying martial arts from he was a kid, a baby. So if you pay attention to the sport now, the UFC, it's actually revolving, because what's happening now is becoming more technical, right? There's more people who are fighting, like a Stephen Thompson, Dominic Cruz, Demetrius Johnson, Conor McGregor's, Anthony Pettis, Michael Page. You know, there are a lot more technical people that are fighting in the MMA sport now. Back in the days, it was more like a kind of brawling thing, and you know, it was looking very unprofessional. You know, like boxing. Boxing is a lot of technique, a lot of skill in boxing, with the footwork, the movement, slipping the punches, head movement, bobbing, weaving. There's a lot of technique in boxing that is hard to just learn boxing in a month and then go and fight a boxer, right? It takes years of training. So the MMA now is kind of stepping up now to being very technical with footwork, movement. So if you have a guy that's just coming in there and just learn some jiu-jitsu, some wrestling, and don't want to fight, he's not gonna last in there. He's not gonna last against guys like a Stephen Thompson, Dominic Cruz, Conor McGregor's, Anthony Pettis. It's not going to be a competition anymore because the game has revolved back around, right? It's becoming more of a technical sport where you have guys with a strong foundation from a traditional background, right? Conor McGregor, Taekwondo, implement karate, right? His movement is from a karate techniques, traditional Taekwondo, right? Anthony Pettis, traditional Taekwondo. His footwork, the movements are from Taekwondo, right? To keep up with that kind of movement is difficult if you don't understand it, if you never train it. You have to understand, in order to understand a movement, footwork, you have to be in relationship with it. If you're trying to fight somebody that is moving around, moving in and out, blitzing in and blitzing out, and cutting corners on you, and shifting, switching the stance on you, and you don't understand it, and you're trying to bang or just walk forward, you're gonna have a hard time with them. Lyoto Machida, same thing, traditional Shotokan karate, right? He implement also Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's from a Shotokan karate, traditional martial arts. That's his base, right? Same thing. His footwork, his movement give people problem because nobody can figure that out, right? Because he has a strong foundation from a traditional background, and everything is just revolving back around to more of a technical sport. We're just relying on leg kick and a punch, or one leg kick and a punch, and clinch and knee. It's not going to work anymore, because when you're trying to move in and do that, the guys are countering you, they're sidestepping you, they're blitzing in, hitting you, moving back out, setting up techniques with the footwork from the outside, throwing multiple of techniques, throwing multiple of kicks, different directions, spinning heel kick, spinning back kick, crescent kick, name it, aerial kicks. They're switching up techniques on you, switching stance on you, which is going to confuse you. You have a next Kung Fu practitioner here, MVP Michael Venom Page from Bellator. Crazy skills, mad skills, knock out almost every single opponent he fights. Deadly techniques, implement knees, elbows, spinning back kick, washigaris, front kick, name it. From a kung fu background, also has karate and kickboxing, right? Now you can say that, oh, the only reason why these traditional styles work is because they're implementing boxing and kickboxing and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Okay, like I said, when it comes to a style, it all depends on the person. So regardless or not if they're implementing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu or boxing, it all depends on the person that's executing the boxing and the Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now that person has to make that style happen. The person is what makes the style, not the style make the person. So without that person, that style is useless, and it all depends on the person who's executing those techniques to make it work. Yes, adding variety of different techniques to your game is very important, and it will enhance your skill set, right? But it still comes down to the person. So if you have a traditional style, traditional system, and you as a person train consistently basis, you set up your techniques in a way where it's effective for street or for combat sports, where everything is executed in one motion, right? You're not winding up, right? You touch and go, implementing footwork, incorporating boxing, incorporating kickboxing, incorporating kung fu, karate, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. The more you have is the better. The more tools you have in your toolbox is the better you're going to be, right? The less you have, you know, is the more vulnerable you're going to be to lose in a fight, because you come in there with only a screwdriver, right? When you have other guys who are coming to the sport with a traditional background who can execute multiple of techniques from any direction, right? And you're only relying on a leg kick and a 1-2 and walking forward. So in order to make any style, any traditional martial art style effective, it's just how you train it for that situation. If you're training for a combat, street fighting situation, you're gonna have to spar, right? You're gonna have to compete on a consistent basis with different martial artists out there, different people. If you're trying to make your style effective and you're just doing, just say, training by yourself, just doing katas and forms, that's good for spiritual, mental, meditation purposes. But if you want to make your technique effective, you're going to have to train it in a real life situation, which is drilling the techniques consistently in a combat, real life sparring situation, which is used in combination when you're throwing your techniques. Setting up your punches with your kicks, setting up your kicks with your punches, and using your footwork to set up those techniques while moving. Shotokan karate, Kyokushin, implement those techniques very well, right? To show those techniques very well in those karate system, right? So if you're able to execute those techniques in a real life situation or combat sports, or train it for those situations, it's very deadly. And it all depends again on the person that's implementing the techniques, right? It's just the way you train it. Are you training it for a real life situation? Are you training it for combat situation? Or are you just training it just for spiritual meditation purposes, just for healing, not for combat? It all depends on how you're training those techniques, and it depends on the person who is training, implementing those techniques.